Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This is Cynthia Forstman, and I want to welcome you to Thursdays with Culture Talk. Teresa Agresta is not joining us live today because she's actually on LinkedIn monitoring comments. So if you are joining us live, she'll be there to answer your questions. Thursdays with Culture Talk is a recurring series of conversations that we have with all different topics related to workplace culture. And because culture is this, all-encompassing idea that touches so many different aspects of an organization, it gives us a lot of different angles to dig into. So over the past couple of weeks, we've talked about talent shortages. We've talked about outsourcing as a strategy. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about toxic workplace cultures, kind of a touchy subject. And we've also talked about resilience. So before I introduce Mercedes, let me tell you what we're going to talk about today. Our topic is building cultures of equity and inclusion. I don't probably need to tell you that the world of DEI is kind of blowing up in the past 2 years. And, there's a number of different things that we might point to about why things are getting more attention today. But there is a stat that says in the US alone, 80% of all of the hires for some kind of DEI director, VP level person have happened in the last year. So there weren't those positions existing, and today they are. And people are expecting things, new things. Employees, stockholders, investors are all looking to leadership teams and organizations to take a stand in a new way around this topic of inclusion and social justice. And so I'm super excited today to dive in with Mercedes, who's been doing this kind of work. I'm going to let you tell a little bit. I'm going to introduce you and then let you share some about your background. But I do want to hear kind of like what was and what is happening today. I do want to dig into that. So Mercedes Martin is a global diversity and leadership development expert. She is a former U.S. Air Force officer who actually got her start in training and development even when she was in the Air Force. She's held numerous positions in corporate America. She spent 10 years at Ernst & Young, EY, as we know it now, leading talent development and change initiatives. And today she is the founder of her own consultancy, Mercedes Martin and Company. So welcome, Mercedes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Cynthia, and welcome to the community. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And one of my favorite topics, culture, because it touches on so much. Yes.
Awesome. So I would love to start by digging into your background a little bit in terms of how did you get to be doing diversity and inclusion work, and where did that begin for you?
Yeah, it's a great story. As sometimes I say, starting with little Mercedes. I think would be. I want to start there today. So for me, the work and the realization comes from that experience of identifying as Black and Latina and coming to this country in the 60s in the middle of the civil rights movement, when there was so much polarization and so much divisiveness, but also this Black consciousness, and coming into a world where people didn't know what to do with us because the color of our skin didn't match the culture that people were expecting. So I start there because it's a very profound and still marks a lot of my life in that sense of finding belonging at a very early age. So not surprising, the work, my first profession was nursing. Okay. And then I make a switch over to leadership development at a time in the 1980s when Roosevelt Thomas out of Atlanta, Dr. Roosevelt, starts talking about managing the diversity and inclusion. And I'm doing leadership development. I'm talking about organizational change, but now people, because of the way I look, start asking me, do you do diversity and inclusion? And I said, well, diversity and inclusion is my life, is what I realized.
That's why I do it. That's kind of a fun question.
Let's talk about intersectionality. Let's talk about gender and all these different refugee experience and mindset. Let's talk about diversity. And then how does that link to leadership development? So that's both how I get invited to the conversation and to the work, and one that why I weave and always say that you can't separate the diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the organization from the leadership development, from the organizational change. It's not a program for me. It has to be system change.
I want to comment one thing, because I did not know until you just said this in the 80s that you were approached, and that was sort of the beginning of, do you think it's the beginning in corporate America of kind of the consciousness around this is an area where we need to focus? What was going on in the 80s?
Well, yes, consciousness, we're making a transition from affirmative action and a realization that you needed more than affirmative action. And then for me, and the first place that really started introducing this work is with Rohini Anand at Sodexo, where we create a true full organizational change, but it's looking at it from this place, well, that it is organizational change, and linking it to study that had come out in 1986 that's saying that the world had changed. And today I laugh when I think about this. And by the year 2000, you were going to have 85%. I could still read the statistics to you. 85% of the new entrants coming into the workplace were going to be women and people of color.
Okay.
And for me, and I talk about that moment, was pivotal, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. I got my data, I got my motivation. When you put that together with, and if you have a strong business case, that's a no-brainer. Every organization is going to look at. So I say it's both. It grew as a result of the next step from affirmative action. And then when you have people like Roosevelt Thomas and the K. Wadas making that connection at a systemic level, you start realizing that this is a different conversation that we're coming to. We're talking about the business, and it's going to be okay to talk about it. At least I feel back then that we thought that was going to be the case. To be continued.
Well, and it's interesting because I think, when we look at any change in society, it kind of bubbles up and then maybe, goes away a little bit, but it comes back. And I wonder, from your experience, so that was in 1980s. First, just give us like an example. When people first approached you and said, can you help us with this topic? Give us an example of what was that kind of an engagement about. Was it leadership? What?
Yes, a lot realized that you started leadership, but if I can start comparing, I feel that back then we were adding it as an additional topic for the leaders to consider and almost sign off. And the major difference that you have today is that the D&I, the equity conversation, the belonging conversation, the sustainability conversation are those soft skills, those people initiatives that before the leader might have in their radar, but didn't necessarily have to embody and be part of the messaging. And now that's very different. So that's something that, yes, we started with the leadership commitment. It's always there from an organizational development frame, because I know that so much of this community, that's where we're coming from. We understood that it was a classic OD, organizational intervention survey, involved the leadership. And I feel that what has changed now is that you need to spend more time with that leader and really understand and connect the dots of what's going on beyond just the diversity and equity and inclusion conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm really, that's what I want to dive into, like what has changed. And so what I'm hearing from you is back in the 80s, there was this, new recognition and movement, a couple of things coming together, and the leader would understand it was important, but would compartmentalize it into, oh, we need to do some soft skills training. Whereas now, I love that you use the word the leader needs to embody, and that there's so much more work directly one-on-one with the leader. Tell us more about that tell us actually a little bit about the companies and clients you work with and how that's playing out for you.
Yeah, because you asked me, you're right, let's go back. The question back then that I would get in the 80s compared to now, and that shows, that can highlight what I'm calling this journey. Back then, my background was, yes, you heard, I shared with you first nursing, but it was transcultural nursing. So I've been in this space from different lenses, using different lenses and different perspectives. So I'm still in, just leaving the Air Force, and I'm still in nursing. And what I would get a lot of times was to come and consult, because the organization was putting together, for example, this was a big tech organization, was putting together a women's leadership program. And they had invited women and people of color. This is when, at the beginning, when we started using that term. And there were Black Brazilians that were invited to the program, because this is a global organization, and they didn't know how to address it, because they were coming back and saying, I'm not a minority in my country. So how do you? So how I first got introduced with, the conversations around diversity and support was on the topic of intersectionality. So I'm one of those people that was really, and I'm putting a global lens. I'm one of those people that was really excited when Beverly's work starts really becoming more popular and more accessible, socializing, and we start understanding the whole notion of intersectionality. That was back then.
Give us a definition. Just give us a definition in case people.
So it's when you have more than one. Thank you. More than one identities. The true definition she uses is if you have more than one identity that put you in one of the out group, the oppressed group in the organization. So in the case of the example I just shared in this women's leadership program, they were women, and they were wanting women of color at the same time. But then when they add the word, so a Black woman is very different than a white woman to intersectional. Where they got in trouble was that that's a very localized way of looking at, the identity. When you add how it's looked at in Latin America and other parts outside of the United States, you see where the complexity and sometimes we lose each other in this type of conversations. I think back then there was more on the identity and a lot on the representation. I need to get so much more of these, more African Americans. We saw that more African American in leadership, more of this, more of that. And if I have more of that, then we can be more powerful. We're going to be a more innovative company and so forth. I'd say that we have that diversity now.
Okay.
And the question is, how are we keeping it in a way? And the diversity that's there, how are we creating these spaces so that we have people showing up in the best of an authentic self as they can, without feeling that they have to put a mask on and armor to be able to be there. And I feel that, especially since 2020, you have people more willing and ready to pull the mask and saying.
Interesting. Wow, that was so packed. So I just want to unpack for a second and follow your train of thought. So it was a numbers game initially, like how do we get more of X to add to our organization? Do you think at that time, Mercedes, that there was, because I heard you say they thought they would be a stronger company, a more successful company? Was there any tie to the bottom line, like stat,
Yeah.
diversity, and performance?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But let me go back. I think the numbers game still goes on today.
Okay.
I'm, part of my notion, and I respect my brothers and sisters on all sides of in the corporate nonprofit that are doing this work. But a lot of times we do get lost because people find it as, I think, is one of the easiest way to measure or believe that we're measuring
Yeah.
success, right? Is also one of the things that you need, that measurement, in order to address a lot of times the resistance that comes from the majority in the organization. So I get the data and so forth. I think we were depending on it, Cynthia, too much, versus really looking at a deeper dive at ourselves. What Sean calls picking up both the mirror and the lens. What's happening, but also how am I creating the experiences and the systems in this organization that's making it difficult for me to invite more people that are different from me to come and join and feel.
Wow. So you mentioned that what you're seeing in terms of it going deeper is what is really happening with a leader, whether they be leading the organization or leading a team, that self-reflective experience. And also I heard, the demand since 2020, which I think is probably the pandemic, George Floyd, all of these kind of social issues bubbling up. People expect now to be able to come to work and be themselves. And so you got kind of two things colliding in a way, and you use the term unmask. Help me dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, when you said people are feeling more free to be themselves, and I think that's true. And the way that I want to come back to that is put a different sense of expectation and responsibility on the leadership.
Okay.
So that expectation and also the competencies of having conversations and engaging with employees in a way that a lot of times in my era, that belongs to the people person, that belongs to the partner or HR that's going to deal. And now you expect everyone from the CEO, in particular the CEO, to be able to address these human, right, with compassion and care. And so there's a need first, I feel, for organizations, and especially the CEO and that C-suite, to model what we're talking about, and that's that deeper reflection on themselves, on who they are, and putting up an authentic way. And an example, because I know that this could be that I use today, and especially now that I'm in Florida, is the situation that we have here with Governor DeSantis passing a bill that opponents have called the Don't Say Gay bill. And Disney speaking, after 3 days of silence, speaking against that bill after internal employee demands, if we stand for this. So I use that example not to focus on the LGBT rights and issues. I definitely support it, and it's something we need to look at. I use it as an example of how the expectation of organizations, especially the leadership, has changed, and how it's all linked to the diversity and inclusion. So in that is as an organization, beautiful, powerful plans and programs internal that support the LGBT organization and LGBT community and allies. Yet when something social outside of the organization is happening, and this is what's different, not only the employees, but society is expecting private organizations to respond to it with a moral and ethical perspective that, they would
What
expect.
it's mean for. Yeah, it is. It's
And that is a whole different game around the diversity. And I'm no pun intended on, are you really seeing this as a movement and going to address diversity? Or are you scared of what your success might be
right.
around it?
Well, as you're saying that, I'm just like even thinking about the light that is getting shown on leadership in terms, and I felt a little scared, like there's certain things in life, like I'd rather not be in the spotlight around. It would be easier to not have to address things that are uncomfortable. And I know that's part of, the gift that you bring to your clients is creating environments where we can have conversations that make people uncomfortable. So I know I did hear there's more of a willingness and a demand for people to show up authentically, but sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable. We have to face difficult things, and we have to face how are we contributing based on our own blinders and lens to, some of the experiences people have in our organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, that's where you and I meet, because that's where I'm looking for a different way to start these conversations that take us away from the traditional, either I'm going to give you the history and look back to what happened and why we're here, whether it's starting with slavery, we're starting talking about colonization, or I'm going to go all the way if I'm really progressive, right? Or I can go all the way on the other end of the continuum, and we're just going to talk about what we're going to build in the future.
Okay.
And these conversations need to be able to, I feel like as a facilitator, you need to convene a space where you can hold the both and for people. And I say that because yes, the Humanity Labs was something that Liz Guthridge and Maloney and I started talking about and designing in 2017 as a way to address the gap between sustainability and equity, but also realizing that, yes, the leadership was asking for these safe and brave places where I wasn't going to be shamed or blamed for learning. So the psychological safety.
And brave, safe and brave.
Yes, because I think you have to have the courage too, right? A lot of times I don't think these conversations are moving because I was listening to Amy Edmonton on the Fearless organization the other day, and she's like, psychological safety never meant that you were going to be safe or cuddled. It was that
it's okay. Yeah.
You're confused. It's okay. We'll stay here. We'll continue talking about it. Versus, I need you to also come with the courage for the candor, and that's when we start hearing, right, the candor and the compassion, even as you're doing hard things. And I think that what that also made me realize is that I couldn't just start with let's talk about why we're doing this in the mindset. We needed to start on how we're convening these spaces, because a lot of times we're still using what do I want to say, rituals. Who goes first? We focus on
unwritten
voices.
Right?
Thank
that
you.
We think about as culture, right? Like kind of like everybody knows what we're supposed to do, even though it hasn't been stated.
Yeah, and of course, what we're supposed to be doing, kind of. So there, I started looking at the work of Craig and Patricia Neal on purposeful leadership and the art of convening. How do you come together with heart? And what we started noticing doing this work, and especially small teams at this level, were these different archetypes of who showed up and how they would take care of the group, separate from equal opportunity. Today I was talking to Drusilla on the for for change. It's like this type of archetype work is equal opportunity for race, ethnicity, gender,
Yeah.
right? Socioeconomic background. It
Yeah.
strips all that. And now I'm looking at a behavior, and I can add all these other layers of or lenses, right? The complexity, you and I talk about this. What I found by paying attention to the convening first, how I was bringing it up and using that specific definition that is about me coming in as a facilitator to know with the intent that we're going to create some new wisdom, this collective out of this. I noticed that it started really opening up the space for now the courage and that hero archetype to show in a very different way. Show in a way where I'm just not being tailored to the command and control that's expected from me as a leader, but understanding that I can let go. And I think that's where the movement is.
Well, first, so Mercedes, I didn't say at the beginning of our conversation, Mercedes is one of our certified partners at CultureTalk, and she is taking the Archetype framework, the framework of human story. And I love how you've just described that in that convening moment, in that opportunity to show up first as a human being and set a safe but comfortable place where I'm willing to take off. I love that it strips all those other layers too, right? Story is human first. And so before I'm, an ethnicity, a gender, from a certain country of origin, of a certain anything, I'm human. And so I love hearing how you're making that a foundational aspect.
Yeah, and that brave is not just what you're bringing up, but brave is also this is the personal work. And it doesn't mean that I don't bring up race. It doesn't mean that I don't look at the patterns around gender. What it means is that it's okay for you to fall deep down into the essence of who you are, and allow yourself to, and I don't want to get too scary spiritual here, but allow yourself to be held in this group so that you don't have to worry about how I'm showing up. Am I the leader? Am I commanding? Am I asking? Am I the white male? Am I coming in with white privilege? Am I the person of color? I'm talking. We come in with all this noise and the space.
And probably into these conversations, like it almost can make them awkward from the sense of like, oh, I don't want to sound like this, or I don't want to sound like that, but to open up to your story and who you are as a human being, that there's something about Archetype that says, oh, you know what? I'm not perfect. I am, colorful. I have these different aspects to my story. And sometimes, it creates a little bit of separation. So it's not Cynthia that has that behavior, but it's Cynthia's creator archetype that has a tendency to do this or that, right? And so we find, and even outside of the DEI, just in terms of team, right? Or in terms of leadership, people's ability to go, oh, it's a pattern. Right? It's a pattern that I'm, have on autopilot a little bit. And it does in so many ways color not only what I see, how I see a situation, it also kind of gets at what I don't see.
Yeah. And for me, contextualizing that and that's what we say, that in the labs, you're able to really explore your human needs around being seen, heard, and connected. So now you can see the interplay of how your archetypes, right, shape your stories, shape who you show up, and it's multidimensional, as as we point out. And I just want to, say for us, and you and I have this conversation a lot, that this is why it's so important to first start, and I feel take the time at that leadership level to take this deep dive of why am I doing this, and am I willing to, I come with a willingness to look at transformation for self. And I don't think that today, and given the big picture societal, right, responsibilities that we're saying that are is expected of leaders, that we can move the needle unless you have that willingness to take a deep dive on what this means for me at a personal level as well.
Wow.
And that's really scary for a lot of folks. So
Yeah.
here, that's the circle of,
We do have a question that I want to pose to you that's come in from LinkedIn, but just let me tie one thing, last thing, and then I'll get to that question. I heard you when you were describing when you sit down, right, in an organization, like how much do you delve into the past story of how we got here? How much do you skip that and delve into, okay, what we're going to be going forward? And I hear a little bit too how Archetype sort of provides a thread.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That you don't let any piece of that, that you find a way to weave together where we've been,
yes,
who we are, and where we're going. And I love that aspect.
Well, I love you're right, looking at the archetypal thread. And for those of you who are wondering, well, then what does this have to do with the diversity and equity and belonging? What I notice is that a lot of times that archetypal thread, or even this conversation, people of color, and I'm totally generalizing here, but for the majority, people of color are either starting or asked to start from the past. There's an expectation of what happened to us. And a lot of times what I find in teams, or even for us individually, as individual, you can't think of the future. It's very, very hard. And, my colleague, Toby Tompkins, is a futurist. He was the one who pointed to me. He's like, if we continue just saying we're going to change, this happened, George Floyd happened, and then that's why we need to change. But you can't see how you're creating a bigger future long-term, that infinite long-term thinking. We continue having the same conversations that are not giving us that courage and possibility of moving forward. And that's what these labs are helping the leaders and the organizations do.
Yeah. Okay, let me give you two questions now that have come in from our listeners. First, and I think this goes back probably to the conversation we were having around Disney in Florida. It says, what level of response to social and political issues from corporate leaders is appropriate?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's a great question. And since I wrote it, and a lot of people, thank you for asking that question. Do you know who the name is, so I can name that?
I don't.
No? Okay. So I think it's a great question, and I'll start, and this is not a consultant answer, but I feel that is what's appropriate has to be localized.
Yeah.
And that's where we get, I feel, in trouble a lot of times with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, Rohini speaks about this in her book, where she starts with, you have to localize it, right? So the article that I just wrote on LinkedIn, I'm speaking to that in that, yes, there's a code of ethics, there's a code of standard that the corporations are pledging to, and you expect, but then how that gets executed and how soon do they need to speak, and how, and especially on geopolitical issues, I think that it needs to be based on where they're at and what particular geopolitical issue they're coming. One thing I know is that when they figure that out, the timing is the first thing that they need to be aware of. And my point there is 3 days nowadays, when you know that the tone is that organizations are expected to respond to these social dilemmas before, and do something about it before any other type of organization, government and so forth. That's what the society is trusting. And for you to take 3 days,
Yeah,
that's not
it's an
acceptable.
eternity, right? So
Yeah.
I will, after we finish our conversation, I will post 2 things in the comments. One is a link to the article that you just posted on LinkedIn, which also, if you're interested in getting in touch with Mercedes, reaching out to her, you can get her
Yes.
through LinkedIn, and also at mercedesmartin.com.
No, Emma Diaz. So
What is it?
mercedesmartin.co. Yes.
Okay, .co. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And then let's also post a link to Rogini's book, which you had me read, which is really a global perspective. And I learned so much in terms of, the US lens, if you will, on DEI. And even that is sort of a blinder if you're not open to what the issues are locally in different parts of the world. Here is the second question, Mercedes. How do you lead the leaders to a willingness to do that deep dive? Or how do you recognize their readiness to do the deep dive?
Yeah, that's the question that we're grappling right now. What are the things? And so in 2016, let me answer it this way. We, Liz and I did interview more than 30, Liz Gushbridge and I interviewed more than 30 leaders. Mm-hmm. And we found that small cohort that I was mentioning before, that we're doing these 5 practices. And that's what we're looking for in the leaders that we work with, and has become almost like our roadmap. So what we noticed in the research was that the ones that were connecting these dots, the ones that were coming out and saying, yes, I have to talk about these social issues, I need to grapple with it. They had gone through a certain experience, and these were the 5 things that they were doing. Number 1, you heard me say, they shift to this open growth mindset where they were looking at both things through a lens, as well as picking up and doing the mirror work. They were doing a lot of introspection. 2, I'm going to just highlight the first 3. Yeah. And no, there's 5 because I know the time. The second one was they were already creating these safe and brave places. Mm-hmm. So when they come to us, they know that there's going to be moments of awkwardness. As a matter of fact, one of our strategic partners here, South Florida People of Color, their program and how we partner with them, their first program is an awkward dinner, where they bring a group together to highlight.
Yeah.
Exactly. And cut through that awkwardness, those 30 seconds of, okay, what do I do when what I really think came out of my mouth and I need to say something next? And that's what I mean. After that, being sure, how do you create those safe places, brave and safe places to continue? So they were doing all of that. And the third thing that we thought was really interesting and not surprising is that they were building these trusting transformational relationships with Sean Cartwright has done so much work in his Pivot book, but noticing that inclusion was not enough to describe how they were building these relationships. So now, and then number 4 is that they have that infinite view. Yeah. And they know that last one, alliances. So when we're talking to a client, when I'm talking to a sponsor and they see they struggle in commitment, or even before commitment, the comfort of being able to address any of those 5s, or not seeing the connecting, how those dots connect, then that's a different entry to this conversation. And I'm not creating this you're better than, kind of hierarchy, but the readiness needs to go along with the willingness.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't make that distinction, and that's important. And I have to say, what's exciting to me today in this work is that you're finding more. I'm speaking. I have people like Swire Properties here in Miami, where you have a leadership that's really wanting to and engaging in this type of conversation with the willingness and readiness. Yeah.
Yeah, that is exciting. I
It
could
is.
talk to you all day because I feel like there's so many little nuggets that we could spell out more. Is there some place where people could get access to your list of 5 or your study on that, your research around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Best right now, because we're in transition, this whole piece of what's happening with the social responsibility and aligning it to the diversity, equity, and inclusion is our next frontier. So all that to say is best for you to email me at mercedes@mercedes.co. Mercedes-Martin.co. So Mercedes@Mercedes-Martin.co. And we also have a website that is also in the, so happy to share both the findings and also the foundation that we're using for this work. You hear me call out names because I feel that this kind of work and level of complexity really requires the systems, ecosystem, and partnering with a lot of different integrated practices. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people doing big thinking and owning a piece of it. Well, we are thrilled to have you in the partner community. We're excited to see where you are taking, the archetype conversation and how foundational it is to your DEI work. And if anybody wants to learn more about CultureTalk, if anyone wanted to learn about Mercedes and other partners in our community, we're at culturetalk.com. There's a Find a Partner tab where you can learn about the different ways that consultants, coaches, and even in-house teams are taking the framework of Archetype into all kinds of culture conversations. We do have 3 certification programs still to come in 2022, with the next one starting on June 1st. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to learn more about the program as well. Mercedes, thank you so much.
And I wanted to just say that is the transformation, using the archetypes for the transformation was for me really life-changing. So thank you, and join up and on here questions. And
yeah, we can't wait to put the case studies together around that too as you continue. So all right, everybody have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, Cynthia. It was fun. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
You take care.